After the birth of the twins, Yoda, Obi-Wan, and Bail Organa decide to keep them together on Alderaan, in an isolated former military base. With the arrival of Ahsoka Tano, a unique team of Jedi Masters is formed to train Anakin's children. Obi-Wan becomes Luke's master, focusing on combat and discipline, while Ahsoka trains Leia, developing strategy and emotional control. Yoda oversees both trainings, teaching Jedi history and ancient techniques. Luke develops extraordinary skill with the lightsaber, exceeding expectations in combat. Leia, meanwhile, excels in her spiritual connection with the Force, mastering telekinesis, telepathy, and predicting the future. After 10 years of intensive training, the twins become full Jedi, combining Luke's physical strength with Leia's mental power, both prepared to face their father, Darth Vader, and Emperor Palpatine. However, their celebration is interrupted after a message from a rebel general to Bail Organa, warning of the Death Star's arrival on Alderaan, followed by Leia's warning. Anakin is here. Everyone at Luke and Leia's celebration party, now recognized as Jedi, was alarmed by the sight of that gigantic structure hovering over the skies of Alderaan. The Death Star, ominous and imposing, seemed to swallow up the horizon, casting a shadow of fear over the planet. Fear spread among those present, for everyone knew what that presence meant. The Empire didn't demonstrate its power without clear reasons, and the arrival of this new weapon, with its unimaginable capacity for destruction, posed a direct threat to Alderaan and anyone who dared to challenge the regime. The demand that accompanied the presence of the Death Star was clear. The Empire demanded the presence of Senator Bail Organa so that he could clear up suspicions of involvement with the rebellion. More specifically, they wanted information about an alleged rebel plan to destroy the Death Star itself. The message left no doubt that any resistance would be futile. The implicit threat was that Alderaan could be reduced to dust if Bail didn't cooperate. The message revealed that Darth Vader and Grand Moff Tarkin were on board, representing the Emperor. This detail sent a shiver down everyone's spine, but at the same time Yoda and Obi-Wan were relieved. The presence of Vader and Tarkin indicated that the Empire's focus was on Bail and the Resistance, and not on the Skywalker twins or the revival of the Jedi Order. At least for the time being, the secret about the formation of the new Jedi Order was still safe. For Bail Organa, the arrival of the Death Star on Alderaan was a clear intimidation ploy. The Empire wanted to make clear the reach of its new weapon and remind all the planets that any sign of insurrection would have dire consequences. Bail knew he had no choice but to respond to the Imperial request, but the worry about what might happen next was evident on his face. The weight of Alderaan's fate now rested on his shoulders. After receiving the message, Bail met with Yoda, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka in their usual meeting room. There, they could discuss the next steps in secret. The atmosphere was tense, and everyone carried with them the uncertainty of what this visit meant for the future of Alderaan. If they failed to resolve this situation, the entire planet would be at devastating risk. They had to think of a strategy to protect not only Bail, but also the secrets they had kept until then. On the way to the meeting room, Ahsoka stopped and looked at Luke and Leia, who, despite their concern, maintained a firm posture. Ahsoka then turned to the three Jedi Masters and said in a serious tone, "Masters, perhaps it's time for them to start participating." Yoda, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka formed what could be considered the new Jedi Council, and now, with Luke and Leia officially as Jedi, the new order was complete. Ahsoka felt it was time to allow the two of them to assume their role. Yoda looked at Obi-Wan, who, with a slight smile, gave a nod of approval. Yoda then agreed with Ahsoka, saying, "Right you are." He turned to the twins and added, "Come along, young Skywalkers." Luke and Leia looked at each other, exchanged a restrained smile, aware that this was a significant step. Their hearts beating fast, they walked alongside their masters. It was the beginning of their active participation in the fate of the galaxy. Ahsoka, proud of Leia, who was now more than a Padawan, put her hand on the young Jedi's shoulder. This gesture conveyed the trust and pride she felt in her former apprentice, now an adult Jedi ready to face challenges alongside her masters and her brother. This moment of complicity between them was a confirmation of the path they had traveled together, a journey marked by growth, learning, and loyalty. The 5 Jedi, together with Bail Organa, entered the meeting room. The tension in the air was palpable, but the atmosphere was also charged with purpose and determination. Luke and Leia were ready to listen, absorb, and participate in the strategy that would define the next steps for the new Jedi Order. They knew that the days of training were behind them and that now they would have to use everything they had learned to protect not only Alderaan, but also the future of the galaxy. With the presence of Darth Vader and the Death Star, the fate of Alderaan and the Resistance was at stake. For the Jedi, the responsibility was greater than any training or teaching they had received. The real test began now, and everyone there knew that what they decided in that room would have immeasurable repercussions. The presence of Luke and Leia at that meeting added even more complexity to the situation. It wasn't just an infiltration mission. It was their own father, Anakin Skywalker, now known as Darth Vader, who was aboard the Death Star. The weight of this revelation hung over everyone, making it clear that the confrontation for which the two had been prepared all their lives could finally take place. Obi-Wan suggested that this could be the opportunity the Force had provided for them to confront Vader. Yoda considered Obi-Wan's proposal, reflecting on the possibility that the Force had actually placed this chance before them on the very day that Luke and Leia were consecrated as Jedi. The coincidence was too intriguing to ignore, and the wise Jedi Master knew that the Force often manifested itself in mysterious and unexpected ways. This could be the final proof that the twins were ready to face the dark legacy their father represented. Bail Organa, concerned for the safety of Alderaan, came up with an idea. He suggested that Luke and Leia infiltrate the Death Star alongside him, disguised as his advisors so as not to arouse suspicion. That way, they would have the chance to get close to Vader without attracting attention, at least until they could confront him directly. However, he knew that the plan involved great risks and that any mistake could cost not only the lives of the young Jedi, but also the safety of the entire planet. The most obvious problem was that Yoda, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka could not accompany Luke and Leia on this mission. If they were seen, Vader would recognize them immediately, and that would put everything at risk. The three masters knew that this battle was something the twins would have to face alone. This meant that the young Jedi would have to rely solely on their own abilities and the intense training they had received throughout their lives. It was a test of fire, but also an opportunity to prove themselves and the galaxy. The great advantage, however, was that Emperor Palpatine was not present. If the information from Bail's informants was correct, the twins would only be facing Vader. This increased their chances of success because, although he was powerful, Vader would be alone. Even so, the challenge was immense. The figure of Darth Vader was feared throughout the galaxy, and he possessed impressive skills, both in combat and in manipulating the dark side of the Force. Luke and Leia, though trained and determined, would need all their strength and emotional control to face him. The tension in the room was high. Everyone understood the risks of this plan. The first was obvious. Luke and Leia would be face-to-face with the Empire's most feared warrior. Although they were skilled and highly connected to the Force, Vader was a unique threat, with experience and power that few could match. However, Luke and Leia were no ordinary Jedi. They were the children of the Chosen One, heirs to a unique lineage and with an extremely high amount of midichlorians, which gave them an unprecedented connection to the Force. What's more, their long training since childhood allowed Luke and Leia to develop skills far above average. Leia's connection to the Force was deeper, offering her advanced intuitive and telepathic perception, while Luke, for his part, possessed a mastery of lightsaber combat that was increasingly on a par with Yoda and Obi-Wan. Together, they formed a formidable combination of strength and strategy, which gave them a real chance against Vader. However, that chance depended on perfect execution of the plan. The second problem was perhaps even more terrifying. The presence of the Death Star over Alderaan meant that any failure in this mission would put the entire planet at risk of destruction. Bail knew that if anything went wrong, the Empire could very well use this weapon of mass destruction to turn Alderaan into an example of its strength. Everyone in the room felt the weight of this threat, and the responsibility on Luke and Leia seemed to multiply. The situation required a delicate balance between courage and prudence. Luke and Leia would have to face Darth Vader without any margin for error, as a defeat would mean not only the loss of two Jedi, but the possibility of Alderaan's annihilation. Even so, there was something that resonated in everyone's hearts. The hope that the Force was guiding their steps and that this confrontation was not just a battle, but a chance for redemption. As they planned the final details, Yoda, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka looked at the twins with a mixture of pride and concern. They knew that the fate of the Skywalkers was deeply intertwined with that of the galaxy and that, in facing their own father, Luke and Leia were carrying not only the burden of their lineage, but also the hope of millions who longed for the end of the Empire. Bail, showing unwavering courage, raised his voice and said that danger was inevitable as long as the Empire continued to exist. He argued that, regardless of any security measures, the mere fact that the Empire possessed a weapon like the Death Star already put everyone at risk. There is no escaping this threat, he declared, and the only solution is to face it. His words echoed around the room, making everyone reflect on the weight of the situation. The Empire posed a constant threat, and running away was no longer an option. What's more, Bail knew that there was a delicate point in the matter. He actually possessed information that could, in theory, destroy the Death Star. If the Emperor already knew this, Alderaan's fate would be sealed. The presence of the Death Star over the planet could be more than a demonstration of power. It could be a clear warning that the Empire was close to discovering everything about the Resistance. That meant they were in a real minefield. Even if the Emperor didn't yet know about the Resistance's plans, Bail warned that sooner or later he might find out. And when that happened, everyone on Alderaan, including the Jedi and the members of the Resistance, would be in mortal danger. The secret they were keeping was fragile, and one slip-up could put everything at risk. The grim prospect of seeing the planet destroyed by this cruel weapon of the Empire became clear to everyone, intensifying the urgency of the situation. After hearing Bail's words, everyone in the room nodded in agreement with the senator's wise and courageous analysis. It was clear that the time for confrontation had indeed come. The fate of Alderaan, the Jedi Order, and the Resistance depended on this decision. With an air of determination, Yoda and Bail began to draw up a plan of action for infiltrating the Death Star, while Obi-Wan and Ahsoka concentrated on Luke and Leia's final preparations for the crucial moment ahead. Yoda and Bail knew that they would need to consider every possible scenario. The initial plan involved infiltrating with Bail as advisors, but the chances of something going wrong were high. So Yoda and Bail began to draw up various contingency actions. They established withdrawal signals, communication points, and escape strategies in case they were discovered before the confrontation with Vader. The intention was to anticipate every obstacle, knowing that improvising during a situation like this could cost lives. While the strategic plan was taking shape, Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, in another room, were making final preparations with Luke and Leia. Obi-Wan emphasized mental defense techniques and emotional self-control, reminding Luke that he was facing not only a ruthless warrior, but also his own father. Ahsoka, for her part, instructed Leia on the importance of trusting her intuition and emotional balance. They both knew that this battle would not only be physical, but a true test of the twins' mental resilience. The depth of Obi-Wan and Ahsoka's instructions was crucial, as both had lived directly with Anakin and knew the strengths and weaknesses of his personality. Obi-Wan, as Anakin's master, knew how he reacted under pressure, where his vulnerabilities lay and how far his rage could reach. Ahsoka, as his former Padawan, knew Anakin's strategic mind and the emotional dilemmas he faced. They were therefore the ideal mentors to prepare Luke and Leia to face Vader. After Yoda and Bail finalized the outline of the plan, all 6 members of the meeting came together to carefully analyze every detail. The situation required precise coordination and minimal room for error. They discussed the possible confrontation scenarios and the tactics they could adopt to deal with Vader if he tried to manipulate Luke and Leia emotionally. They knew that Vader would use every weapon, including the family bond, to shake the twins. The atmosphere in the room was tense and focused. Everyone understood that the fate of the galaxy could depend on the success of this mission. It wasn't just a question of defeating Vader, but of weakening the Empire and possibly striking the first decisive blow against it. The 6 Jedi and Senator Organa were, at that moment, the pillars of a resistance that could change the course of galactic history. As the plan was finalized, everyone felt the weight of their responsibilities. Luke and Leia, now Jedi graduates, had the chance to fulfill the destiny that had awaited them since birth. From that small council, in a simple meeting room on Alderaan, could come the first sparks of the fall of the Empire, giving hope to millions of beings who yearned for freedom and justice. It was not only the future of the galaxy that now rested in Luke and Leia's hands, but also the responsibility of bringing balance to the Force, something their father, Anakin, had failed to achieve. They carried the legacy of an unfinished destiny, and the weight of that was immense. The Chosen One's prophecy now involved them directly, and the success of their mission could be the only chance of redemption for the Skywalker name. Every word and gesture from their masters carried the hope that they would complete what Anakin had started, but which had strayed to the dark side. Luke and Leia's mission was clear. When the time was right, they would reveal their identity to Vader and use the emotional bond to destabilize him. This vulnerability could be the weak point that would allow them to defeat him. However, they were aware that if, even defeated, he refused to renounce the dark side or redeem himself, they would have to eliminate this threat once and for all. It wasn't an easy task, but everyone knew there was no other option. There could be no hesitation when the enemy was someone with Vader's power and influence. Yoda made a point of emphasizing that the dark side offered no room for compromise or negotiation. Anyone who allowed themselves to be dominated by the dark side would not hesitate to use tricks to manipulate and deceive. If Luke and Leia didn't stand firm, they could fall into a trap. The instruction was clear: defeat Vader physically and emotionally, appealing to kinship, but never let your guard down. Redemption could only be offered if he was truly willing to return to the light, and only once the situation was completely under control. With a serious expression, Yoda reminded them of the main Jedi teaching. The Force requires balance, but this balance must be achieved through discipline and firmness. Vader, as a servant of the dark side, was a threat that had to be contained. If he tried to manipulate them, the twins could not hesitate. The journey of a Jedi was arduous and full of difficult choices, and this moment was the culmination of the training they had received. They both nodded silently, understanding the gravity of the mission. Bail interrupted the conversation by opening a hologram showing the advance of the Rebel Alliance. The Rebel offensive, organized to destroy the Death Star, had been brought forward because of the imminent threat to Alderaan. With the planet in danger, the rebels knew that every second counted. They were willing to risk everything to annihilate the Empire's ultimate weapon and protect the galaxy, even if the price was high. Bail didn't hide his concern, because he knew that if they failed, Alderaan would be the first to suffer the consequences. The plan now was for Luke and Leia to defeat Vader and then deactivate the Death Star's protection system according to the map that was with Bail, thus facilitating the rebel attack. They needed to do this and get off the ship with Bail before the bombing began. The urgency of the mission increased the risks, but the opportunity was unique. If they didn't act now, the chance to defeat Vader and weaken the Empire might never come again. They knew that the success of this plan could change the course of the war and finally bring hope to the galaxy. With the plan mapped out and all the strategies reviewed, they left the meeting room and headed for the Alderaan hangar. The atmosphere was charged with emotion and determination. Luke and Leia knew that the confrontation with Vader was near, but the thought that the mission could cost them their lives didn't intimidate them. They were ready to fulfill their destiny. This was the moment they had trained for and waited for years, and there was no room for doubt. Obi-Wan approached Luke and hugged him, giving him one last gesture of support and confidence. "Remember everything you've learned and may the Force be with you," he whispered. Leia received Ahsoka's firm embrace, which gave her a silent strength and a certainty that she was ready. It was a farewell full of meaning, as everyone knew that this could be their last meeting. However, their confidence in the Force and in what they were about to accomplish sustained them. The two of them boarded the ship alongside Bail, aware that their next destination would be the heart of Imperial power, the Death Star. They looked at the planet Alderaan one last time before leaving, knowing that they were risking everything to protect those they loved and bring about a better future for the entire galaxy. Then they set off. Bail Organa piloted the ship with confidence, and Luke observed everything around him, fascinated by the vastness of space, something he had never experienced before due to his confinement on Alderaan. The brilliance of the stars and the immensity of the galaxy made him ecstatic, but this fascination soon gave way to tension as he saw the ominous silhouette of the Death Star growing on the horizon. The approach of the Imperial ship imposed an overwhelming sense of power and danger, and Luke and Leia, although trained, felt the weight of the mission they were about to carry out. When they identified themselves, they were allowed to land and headed for the Death Star hangar. As soon as they disembarked, Empire officers led them through cold, metallic corridors to a meeting room where Darth Vader and Grand Moff Tarkin were waiting for them. The atmosphere was oppressive, and the sound of soldiers' boots echoed through the corridors, reinforcing the heavy atmosphere of the meeting. Luke and Leia remained calm, concentrating on every detail around them. When they reached the room, they were greeted by Tarkin with an expression of contempt. The Admiral, in an ironic and authoritarian tone, signaled for them to sit down, addressing Bail with disdain. "Bail Organa, I've been told that you might have information that is of great interest to the Empire." It was clear that Tarkin was there to intimidate them, and his gaze was sharp, as if he already considered everyone guilty. Bail stood his ground, but before he could reply, Vader, who was watching intently, interrupted. Vader's gaze settled on Luke, who had just sat down. In a deep, penetrating tone, he asked, "Who are you?" Vader's presence was so intense that it seemed to cross any barrier, physical or emotional. Luke felt a chill, but before he could answer, Tarkin interrupted him impatiently. "Vader, we don't have time for this." There was a conflict of authority between the two, but Luke and Leia realized that now was the time to act. Leia gave Luke a slight nod, indicating that it was time to reveal her identity. Luke then stood up, facing Vader and Tarkin directly. "My name is Luke Skywalker," he declared firmly, "and this is my sister, Leia Skywalker. We are the children of Padme Amidala and Anakin Skywalker." The announcement surprised everyone, and Admiral Tarkin, confused, rose from his chair. "What is this?" he exclaimed in disbelief, but before he could continue, Vader raised his hand, interrupting him with an authoritative gesture. "Wait," Vader ordered, but Tarkin, in his impatience, continued, "Vader, we don't have time for this." However, before he could say another word, Tarkin began to choke. Vader, in a calculated move, used the Force to squeeze the Admiral's neck, who tried in vain to free himself. "Sit down and shut up," said Vader, pushing him away with the Force and forcing him back into his chair, completely overwhelmed. Vader then turned to the twins, watching them in silence. Luke, staring at his father, said calmly, "You know it's true. You can feel it." The tension was as high as it could be, and the atmosphere seemed even darker. Vader, keeping his cool, replied after a long silence, "Yes, I can feel it." There was a tone of acceptance but also of challenge in his voice. Leia, on hearing this reply, began to look around, preparing for the action they had planned. Her body was tense, ready to react at the slightest sign. Vader then broke the silence, asking, "What do you want here?" Luke took a deep breath before replying, "We want to take Anakin back. We want our father to leave the dark side and return." Vader looked at Leia and again at Luke and gave a cold, dark laugh. "Do you think that will work on me?" he asked, challenging them with his deep, echoing voice. Luke, realizing that the conversation was not going to progress, exchanged a quick glance with Leia, knowing that it was time to move on to the confrontation. In a sudden move, Luke drew his lightsaber and struck a blow against Vader. The speed of the attack took the Sith by surprise, and although he managed to take a slight step backwards, tilting his body, the tip of Luke's saber brushed against his armor, setting off sparks. As Bail ducked for cover, Leia simultaneously drew her own saber and, following Ahsoka's precise instructions, she took out Admiral Tarkin with a calculated and precise move, just as planned. Soon after, Leia launched herself at the stormtroopers in the room, using her skill and keen reflexes to dodge the laser blasts aimed at her and Luke, neutralizing them one by one. She moved with surgical precision, allowing Luke to focus entirely on Vader while she dealt with the soldiers. The twins were in full action, and the confrontation had only just begun. Vader, surprised by Luke's speed and precision, barely had time to draw his lightsaber before he was attacked by a series of skillful and aggressive blows. Luke advanced with determination, attacking without hesitation, forcing Vader to defend himself quickly. Each of Luke's blows was stronger and more precise than the last, forcing Vader to retreat and use all his skills to stay in the fight. The two moved at an intense pace, their lightsabers lighting up the room with each clash, creating sparks and echoes that filled the space. The sound of the blades was accompanied by growing tension as Luke pressed his father in a duel of skill and strength. Leia, having finished eliminating all the stormtroopers in the room, joined the fight alongside Luke, further strengthening the attack against Vader. The two siblings fought in perfect harmony, as if anticipating each other's movements, exchanging positions and combining attacks in synchronized fashion. Vader was impressed, not only by his son's strength and dexterity, but also by the unique connection between them. The combination of their attacks forced him to be on his guard constantly, and he realized how well trained they were, both in combat and in uniting through the Force. Realizing that he was being overpowered, Vader decided to act strategically. He used the Force to throw heavy objects towards Leia, trying to distract Luke and thus weaken his pace of attack. While Leia was defending herself against the objects coming towards her, Vader took advantage of a moment of Luke's distraction and, with a powerful movement of the Force, threw the young Jedi against the ceiling, causing him to fall unconscious to the floor. The room was silent for a moment, with only Leia now standing, facing his father. Vader, wasting no time, used the Force to lift Leia off the ground, squeezing her neck and rendering her immobile. "You still can't imagine the power of the dark side," he said, in a dark and imposing tone. "The three of us together could rule the galaxy." He offered the promise of absolute power, but Leia knew it was a trap, an attempt at manipulation. Feeling short of breath and the pressure on her body, she closed her eyes and searched for answers in the Force, trying to find a way to connect with Vader's mind and look for some point of weakness. Opening her eyes, Leia faced Vader firmly and, in a calm, intense voice, said, "Anakin, you're breaking my heart. You're following a path I can't follow." The words hit Vader like an invisible blow. The emotional impact was instantaneous, for those were the words Padme had spoken to him before his complete transformation into Darth Vader. Leia repeated her mother's words, and it brought back a flood of memories that he had tried to suppress for years. Leia, in deep concentration, began to explore Vader's mind in search of an emotional opening. In the midst of distant memories and repressed pain, she found a scene deeply stored in his dark heart. The words of Padme, his mother, during the last confrontation on Mustafar. Leia remembered the exact words Padme had said to Anakin and, using her telepathic ability, projected herself to access that moment and bring up that memory. For an instant, Vader saw his daughter in the same position as Padme, standing before him vulnerable, saying the same exact words. The emotional pain was intense, and Leia managed to make him see in her an echo of his beloved Padme. The emotional manipulation had the expected effect. Vader hesitated, his hand trembled, and, in an instinctive movement, he released it, letting it fall to the ground. Leia felt the ground firm under her feet again and took a deep breath, watching as Vader took a step back, lowering his head. Silence overtook the room and, for a few moments, it seemed that the man in the black armor was fighting the internal conflict that was emerging in his heart. He was vulnerable, shaken by the weight of the memory, and his imposing figure now seemed to shrink before the emotional force that Leia had awakened. Still trying to process what he was feeling, Vader remained motionless, his head lowered, as memories of Padme and the life he had left behind consumed him. Leia knew that this was a rare moment of weakness and that, however briefly, he had touched Anakin's essence. As soon as Leia set foot on the ground, she realized that this was a unique opportunity and she had to act fast. Without wasting any time, she concentrated on Luke's mind, trying to wake him up. In her telepathic connection, she shouted, "Luke, wake up!" Her mental voice echoed intensely until, on the third attempt, Luke finally opened his eyes and looked directly at Leia, still in a daze. Leia indicated the lightsaber that was next to him, and Luke, getting the message, used the Force to pull it towards his hand. With a swift and decisive movement, Luke came out of his lying position and, in a single swift blow, cut off the legs of Vader's armor at the knees, sending him crashing to the ground with a metallic clang. Without giving him time to react, Luke lunged forward and cut off both of Vader's arms, leaving him defenseless. Vader's breathing was already hampered, but to ensure his vulnerability, Luke struck one last blow, destroying the control panel of his armor on his chest. The sound of Vader's mechanical breathing became irregular and weak, and he was completely at the mercy of the Jedi. It was then that Leia intervened. "Enough, it's over," she said, her voice firm. Luke, his heart still racing, stopped and switched off his lightsaber, looking at his father lying defeated on the floor. From the corner of the room, Bail Organa, who had been watching everything in silence, stood up and approached the two of them, urgency stamped on her face. "We have to go. There's no time," he said, reminding them of their mission. Luke nodded and turned to Leia, saying, "Come on, Leia." However, Leia, with a determined look on her face, replied, "No, you go. I'll stay here with him. I'll wait for you to come back." There was a mixture of compassion and duty in her voice. Something in her urged her to stay by her father's side, even with the risk involved. She knew that this moment could be crucial for Anakin, perhaps a last chance at redemption. Luke hesitated, feeling the weight of his sister's choice, but Bail insisted with a tone of even greater urgency. "We have to go, Luke." Reluctantly, Luke agreed and turned to Leia, leaving one last instruction. "It's not over yet. Stay alert." Leia nodded, standing firm in her decision and positioning herself next to the door, her senses alert for any movement. With one last look at Leia, Luke followed Bail, who was carrying the map with the instructions on how to deactivate the Death Star's protection system. They needed to act fast. The rebel offensive was underway, and without disabling the defenses, any attack would be useless. The two of them advanced through the corridors, focused and determined, aware that every second was precious to ensure the success of the mission and the safety of Alderaan. Leia, still standing guard at the door, was watching Vader's slumped body on the floor when an overwhelming wave of emotion suddenly hit her. Relaxing for a brief moment, she remembered the intense and painful sight. Before her eyes flashed the scene of the argument between her parents Padme and Anakin on the planet Mustafar, moments before her birth. But the most surprising thing was that she was there, still in her mother's womb, as if she was feeling the intensity of the conflict between them. The experience was profound and confusing, as Leia not only watched the scene, but also felt what Anakin felt, a mixture of fury and despair, and, at the same time, experienced her mother's emotional pain. It was as if all these feelings had been preserved in her, a dormant memory that was now awakening with overwhelming force. The intensity of the memory made her feel Mustafar's burning heat. She saw Padme and Anakin's faces, and the deep suffering that had shaped her family's history. Tears began to stream down Leia's face, uncontrollable. Overcome by emotion, she approached Vader, going against the plan they had made. She put away her lightsaber and, with trembling hands, stooped down beside him. Carefully, she removed the mask from his face, revealing a countenance marked by pain and time. Anakin's face was completely different from the one she had just seen in her vision. Instead of the young, passionate Jedi, she found an aged man, full of scars and suffering. A deep pang went through her heart, and all she felt was compassion. For Vader, who was on the verge of death, barely able to breathe, that moment was a devastating emotional shock. As he looked at Leia, so close and full of compassion, he saw her as a reflection of Padme, the woman he had loved deeply and lost. For a brief moment, his connection with the dark side seemed weakened. Leia's presence there, holding him so tenderly, caused a confusion of emotions within him. It was as if past and present were merging, and he found himself, for the first time in decades, vulnerable in front of his own daughter. Leia remained by Anakin's side, lost in that moment of unexpected connection, unable to think of anything else. The images of her father's vision and the love that was still in her heart kept her there, immersed in compassion and indescribable pain. She completely lost track of time until the shrill sound of an alarm brought her back to reality. When she looked up, she saw Luke and Bail Organa rushing into the room. Luke, not understanding the situation, called out to her, "Leia, we made it. Let's go." Leia turned to Luke with tear-filled eyes, unable to contain the plea that welled up in her heart. "We have to take him," she said, her voice breaking. Luke was paralyzed, feeling the weight of the choice his sister was putting before them. Bail, realizing the urgency of the situation, removed his cloak and quickly suggested that they use it as a kind of makeshift stretcher. He encouraged Luke to help him carry Vader. Joining forces, Bail and Luke quickly lifted Vader, while Leia took the lead. She led the way, lightsaber in hand, guarding the path and defending them from the attacks of the approaching stormtroopers. With quick, precise movements, Leia deflected the laser blasts and cleared the way as the group advanced through the Death Star's corridors towards the ship. Every second was a race against time, and the tension built up with every step. Finally, they reached the hangar, which was a chaos of pilots running everywhere, so they quickly boarded the ship, taking off from the Death Star, and as soon as they were noticed, a fleet of Imperial fighters set off in pursuit. Bail piloted skillfully, trying to escape, while Luke and Leia observed the situation, ready to defend the ship. Suddenly, they saw a cloud of rebel fighters advancing, attacking the Imperials and clearing the way for them to escape. It was the Rebel Alliance's final offensive, and the battle around the Death Star was at its climax. And after entering Alderaan's atmosphere, as they approached the hangar, a gigantic explosion lit up the space behind them. Looking back, Luke and Leia saw the Death Star being destroyed in an explosion of epic proportions. The rebel pilots had succeeded in their mission, and the Empire's greatest weapon was now just debris in the space void. When they arrived at the Alderaan hangar, everyone present was in a state of shock, mixing expressions of relief, fear, and elation. The Death Star, the greatest threat the Empire had ever created, had been destroyed, and the impact of this was difficult to process. The galaxy now had new hope. Rebels and Resistance soldiers looked at each other, trying to absorb the fact that this gigantic symbol of oppression had been reduced to rubble. Victory was real, and everyone felt that something had changed profoundly. Leia was the first to get off the ship, and when she saw Ahsoka running towards her, she couldn't hold back her tears. The two hugged intensely, and Leia cried, letting out all the tension and emotion she had built up. Obi-Wan, who was right behind Ahsoka, watched the scene with a mixture of pride and relief, while Bail descended from the ship with Luke, both carrying Vader's body on a makeshift stretcher. The rush was evident. Vader needed oxygen and immediate care so that he could recover. Ahsoka and Obi-Wan, upon realizing who was on the stretcher, looked at each other in a state of complete amazement. Seeing Anakin, their old friend and master, there, weak and helpless, was something they had never imagined. They approached slowly, and as they stood next to Anakin, they could see his eyes ajar. Anakin looked at them with a mixture of resignation and remorse, while, in the background, the sight of the Death Star in flames reflected the end of an era. Luke and Leia, positioned just behind, completed the scene, which seemed to carry immense symbolism and a promise of redemption. Master Yoda, walking slowly towards the group, approached with a serene look of deep satisfaction. He watched Luke and Leia for a moment and, with his characteristic manner, declared, "With great success, you have accomplished your first mission, young Skywalkers." His words were greeted with reverence, and a feeling of silent hope hung over everyone. It was the beginning of a new phase for the galaxy, and everyone knew that, despite the challenges that still lay ahead, something bigger and brighter had been born at that moment.